Hey friends, you're always looking at me, so I thought today maybe you could just look at my beautiful farm. Not my farm, the farm behind where I live that is open to the public to walk on. As I talk about this, I have made another video about this episode of this podcast, Bewildered, that is really impacting me. But I wanted to really highlight this one point that they made about how the sedation that we seek, the inability to process our big feelings, the difficulty we have with feeling like life is too hard is not our fault. That has been created by the context of all sorts of things, specifically, a post-agricultural world where everything is time bound and productivity bound, and you have to have enough money and all of these things for survival. And so they talk about this experiment from the 90s known as the rat park experiment. So they took a group of rats and they were studying heroin addiction in post active duty Vietnam vets, and how some continued their heroin addiction and some did not. So they were wondering what were the differences between these two groups of people. So they took rats and they got them all heroin addicted, and then they sort of studied what happened to them. Okay, so they noticed that all of the rats stayed heroin addicted. I may be getting the details wrong, but it's the general idea. So then they thought, okay, they're in a cage. All of these rats are in a very tiny cage. So they're like, what if we built them a beautiful park, okay? A beautiful, wide open spaces with areas to do all the things that rats like to do, okay? So they built this beautiful park and they put one bowl of water that had heroin in it and one bowl of water that was just fresh water. So the rats are in this gorgeous park. They're no longer in these tiny cages. And at first, they're drinking the heroin water. But then they noticed that the rats slowly switched to the regular water. And they're like, oh my gosh. They were reaching for the drug, not primarily because of their addiction, but primarily because of their environment, the environmental pressures, limitations, frustrations, constrictions, okay? So when people are in a scenario like a rat, where we're in a cage, we're caged by societal expectations, we're caged by, being taught since we're little, stop crying, you're fine. We're caged by, you have to work this many hours a day doing something that is very disrespectful to your natural rhythm. You're waking up when your body is overtired. You're having to raise children in a small box, of a house with no community support. You're having to face ever increasing debt because you tried to go to school. You're dealing with a world full of war and genocide and rape and famine and children dying and cancer, and your children are being bullied at school, all of these things. And these cages are so terrible that of course we're reaching for sedation, right? In the form of whether it's substances or shopping or foods that don't sit well with our body, or overwork, or screens, right? And there's such an element of it is not your fault. And so much of the, as they refer to in the episode, the big wellness and people promoting nervous system regulation are like, okay, well, do more yoga, meditate more often, take more bubble baths, because your self-care is not high enough. Okay, how can a rat self-care in a cage, right? So this is where, for me, The other really important and often missing part of the conversation around nervous system work is, why do we calm down in the first place? Why do we do the yoga? Why do we do the breath work? Why do we do the self-care? Okay, and this is where a lot of people get hung up on Byron Katie, who does the work, the self-inquiry called the work, right? They're like, how are we going to address injustice if we're just accepting everything? So both the nervous system work and the work of Byron Katie is not, the point of it, the end goal is not to calm down. The end goal is to get in a clear enough state of mind so that you can actually get back to your executive functioning and make some decisions and make some changes in your life, in the world, okay? So it is not our fault that we have been put in a cage, all right? And we have been tasked with the unbelievable challenge of being asked to get off the heroin ourselves enough while we're still in the cage to be able to hatch a plan with our executive functioning of how to get out of the cage, okay? And the reason why I say unbelievable and virtually impossible is because I don't expect everyone to be able to do this. That's an insurmountable task. There are many, many instances in which we are going to, and that's where like mutual aid and co-regulation comes in, is if those of us who have the resources and the wherewithal, those of us in slightly bigger cages, okay, can support ourselves enough to get out of our cages, then we can come together and hatch a plan to help get some other cages open. And that's, Byron Katie talks about, once you've done the work a lot and you're not so trapped by your own story and your own suffering related to your stressful thinking, you can then go take very decisive action in your life and in the world to create better circumstances in the world. So, this is one of those things where it's like, if you can, you can, or like in 12 steps, they say you can't until you can, right? This can take a really long time. And one of the other pressures of our training is everything should happen overnight, right? Overnight success is like the biggest praiseworthy thing. So for me, sorry, that's my glove. I gotta put my glove on because my hand is freezing. For me, this process has been more than a decade. It's been my whole life coming, but, sort of post, I would say it's been, 20 years since my overdose, since being hospitalized after attempting suicide. And I've been, trying to get off the heroin and make the cage a little bit bigger or figure out how to get out of the cage for that whole time. None of it's been overnight. And it's been a lot of like times when I even got into a smaller cage because I was in such dorsal, in that total shutdown response from the circumstances being so impossible that my nervous system just had to shut down. So there's no like hierarchy to getting out of the cage or getting off the heroin. And we don't even know if ultimately what our souls want is to be out of the cage and off the heroin, right? We don't know what this program is. It could be that we're okay with all of the, violence and pain and devastation in the world. I don't really know. But the main point that is important to me from this is to say, it is not your fault, and do not beat up on yourself if you're in a cage or on the heroin. Obviously, I'm taking the metaphor pretty far, but you know what I mean. So, if it's not our fault, and we don't actually have to do anything about it, it's more like if you want to do something about it and you feel you have the wherewithal, then there are things that you can do. And, Jessa Reed, who I really respect and appreciate, has lately been talking about, like, no one is coming to save you. The savior, victim, villain construct is ending, and the dependency on an external authority figure is ending. So in this context of the rat park experiment, it's like no one's coming to get you out of the cage, okay? My, like, extra little addition to that is I think we will be able to support each other in getting out of the cages, okay? So I don't think it's, like, only up to you, right? My whole mission with my work is to be like, let's try and get out of the cage together. That's what my podcast is about. Like, how did you get out of your cage? That's what my, nervous system education and using the SSP is like. Hey, I found this key that helped me get out of the cage. Do you want to use it? With total respect for, like, you might not be ready. So I'm really into mutual aid for sure. So no one's coming to save you in the sense of there's not going to be, like, Mr. God, as I've heard it called, which I really love, or Sky Daddy. This, like, Santa Claus in the sky is not coming to save you. However, when we are willing to put down both the pressure of I should be able to do it by myself and the pressure of, like, don't expect me to do it before I'm ready, or, like, I have to do it now, overnight. When we put both of those down, then it leaves room for us to consider, like, okay, maybe the people around me are not just a threat. Maybe I could get help from other people, and I could start by doing some of this, testing out how it is to express my feelings with myself in a journal, test out how it is to be around people who think a little differently by listening to podcasts or reading books, test out how it is to interact with those people by being involved in a community that's like online community or like a 12-step group. Start to get around people who are, trying to get out of the cage. And slowly but surely, gaining the wherewithal and letting there be setbacks and letting there be shifts and whatever. Slowly getting the wherewithal to be like, okay, maybe we could help each other, like, build a little bit of a bigger cage, a little bit of a bigger cage, a little bit of a bigger cage, right? And then we may see that our need for the numbing goes down, not because we just, like, weren't doing enough self-care, but because we were given so much more freedom and support. And obviously there are limitations in this analogy. Not everybody is going to be able to create an amazing rat park, but we can start to do little things like, like I just mentioned, expressing ourselves in a journal, or in some sort of an online community or 12-step group, something like that, and slowly be able to find more support for ourselves. And the analogy falls away when we are talking about, like, material resources, because not everybody's going to be able to, this is debatable, but it is challenging at this point to end up with a, gorgeous rat park, a mansion type of situation. And when I talk about the cage falling away, I'm not talking about material changes in your life. I'm talking about, more of the psychological experience of your life being less restricted. So anyways, let me know what you think about this. I hope you enjoyed my beautiful walk as much as I do every day. I love you each so much. I'm going to put the episode of the podcast that I was referencing in the description. And in there is a link to the rat park experiment that is just a Wikipedia. So you can just look it up on Wikipedia too. It's very interesting. And really highlights like, why are people suffering from addiction to screens and substances and so much anxiety and depression? Is it because people are poor character? No, it is because they have been trapped into a cage and they are trying to survive. And so it is not your fault. And here's the nice squishy mud that I get to walk through at the end of my walk. So satisfying. It is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And you may have the ability to respond and you may not. And it's okay if you do not. And if and when the time is right for you, you will be able to do it. And there is no hierarchy and you do not need to become responsible, become able to respond. You do not need to let go of your cage before you're ready, because we don't know. It could be that your cage is the best thing for you right now. So there is always choice, always choice. I love you, love you, love you. And let me know what you think. Okay.